So good evening, everyone. Hyvää iltaa if you're in Finland, god kväll if you're in Sweden, and erev tov if you're in Israel. Welcome to anyone else who speaks English or other languages. So now, we're on a rather disagreeable subject this evening, which is sex, but it's in the book, so we have to deal with it. There it is. And there are a few paragraphs on this topic in the big book. I'm an addict, by the way. A few topics in the big book, and there are also a few lines which are helpful in the 12 and 12. So, because there are just a few paragraphs, we can go through all of them. That's why I won't have headings this evening. We're just going to read and see what happens. So, as Bill says on page 68, now about sex. Many of us need an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, a base necessity of procreation. Then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we do not have enough of it, or that it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavour for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight peppered diet. We want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? Now, I've been in recovery for 33 years now, and of course, I've encountered all of these extremes that Bill talks about. And I know people, there are various fellowships that deal with sex, and there is a range of experiences, a range of approaches about how to deal with sex. I know in SA there's an extremely narrow sense of what is going to be acceptable to God. In other fellowships, it's, as it were, more lenient, and the view is you come up with your own, as they're called, bottom lines. Those are the absolute no-nos, and then maybe you ring fence it with certain other behaviours which are adjacent to the behaviour you're trying to avoid. Maybe there might be positive ideals. Now, the big book has a little bit of both, in a sense. I think the first thing I would say, however, about sex is how brilliant that paragraph is, in that it says you don't have to copy what everyone else is doing. And I've met a lot of people who, for instance, in SA, they just can't stick to the very, very tight bottom lines. And over time, they develop a different way of dealing with it. And the same can go in the other direction. There are people that try to adopt a lax approach or not a lax approach, but make up your own bottom lines, and they can't stick to that. They need the very, very extreme version that SA offers. I won't talk in detail about the SA version, except it's very strict. One of the things that Father Tom says, which is very good, if something helps, use it. If something works, carry on doing it. If it doesn't work, stop doing it. If it doesn't help, stop doing it. So whatever the theory about what should work to help someone in the area of sex, the question is it working or not? If it's working, fine. But if you're trying an approach and you've tried it for 5 or 10 years and you're back at step one, in inverted commas, relapsing every 2.5 minutes, clearly something isn't working. And this not wanting to be the arbiter, I think so much of the problem comes from imposing terminology on this area. And believing that just because one has done a certain thing, one has automatically relapsed. The notion that everything outside a very narrow area is relapse, that anything other than something in the context of a marriage is necessarily sex addiction, and I just don't think it is. That's my view. That's not about what anyone else should or shouldn't do. It's just a little bit of introduction to this area. I've had voices crying at me from both directions about what the right thing is. And what I would say is I've had to find my own way, and it's been a rather tortuous path over the last 30 years, and getting older helps. If you feel there's no hope, eventually you'll get older, and then lots of other things in life macrame will become more important to you than sex. Listening to the Archers, if you're not British, you won't know what the Archers is, but for about 5 years that was far more important than anything to do with sex and romance. So things have a habit of sorting themselves out. Now, there are some interesting things in this passage. One school would allow man no flavour for his fare, and the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. Now, one very rarely hears people talk about this straight pepper diet. It's a very odd idea, the idea of eating only pepper. Now, at a group I used to go to in London, which shall remain nameless, whenever it got round to this, actually I'd started to avoid the meeting when it was the sex inventory section, because the topic became something called sober sex, as though it was a sort of activity in and of itself, a sort of pastime that one was supposed to cultivate and become rather good at. And I rather like what Bill says. His view, apparently, is that sex is like pepper. It is not one of the major food groups. It is a condiment to some meals. And this changes everything. For a large part of my life, a big chunk of my adult life, sex was a terribly important thing. And the problem was not what I was doing. The problem was the significance it had, the amount of mental time it took up, the amount of physical time it took up, the other things it squeezed out. What was meant to be a condiment was a major food group. What was meant to be a micronutrient was one of the major macros. And that was the whole problem with it. And it's because I think I'm not a psychoanalyst and I don't know. I have a feeling it's because one of the first occasions in my life when I really connected with another human being was, as it were, between the sheets. I thought, okay, so that's how you connect. And that became my primary way of creating a connection with another human being. And that will F you up for a few years. And so that became the most significant factor in forming a relationship. In fact, I had the philosophy that you need to check them out in that department first before you really go any further, before you even ask their name. Who needs a name when you have all of the information available between the sheets? And this was a massive distortion. What I also found was that I'm not really talking about the book, I'm just talking about myself, so I apologise for that. We'll come to the book in a moment, but maybe this needs a bit of an introduction, so forgive me for that. The sorts of people I would engage with, as it were, between the sheets, were not good for me. And I had an unerring instinct for people that weren't good for me, and I imagine I wasn't good for them either. As a friend of mine says, I could sniff them out through lead. And this friend's advice to me in recovery: if you walk into a room and your eyes lock with someone else's and you know they are the one, do not even say hello. Find someone dull and ask them what they had for dinner today. And do that a few times until you find out whether you have something culinary in common. I'm married. I've been married for 20 odd years to someone who is quite wonderful, but absolutely not of the cast of the type that I would engage with in these unhealthy interactions for many years. It turns out what I was having was not real relationships. It was physically based entanglements, psychic entanglements. So for me, as they say. For me, what I've had to do is demote sex from being a major food group in my life to being a condiment. If it is part of a relationship, very good. If it's not, it's fine. And I remember many years ago, I was asking, I think, a sponsor about what I perceived to be the problem of there being not very much going on in the bedroom department of a relationship. And his question to me was, yes, but what about the intimacy? And the fact is, I was incredibly close to this person. There was no problem with intimacy. In the A Course in Miracles, it says it is the mind that connects. It is not the body. If the only way you can connect with someone is through the body, you're in big trouble, because that's not a real connection. That's something else. And my connection with my other half, there are physical expressions of it, but boy, is the physicality. It's not even top 20 ways we connect. It's a gazillion other ways. And so it has a robustness. It's not dependent on certain difficult physical functions. So, that's a little bit of background. Now to the actual inventory. So, we reviewed our conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got all this down on paper and looked at it. Now, this is the technical bit, so on to the book now. This is the so-called sex inventory. So the first question is, who am I writing about when I'm looking at these questions? First of all, anyone that I've had some kind of sexual or romantic interaction, relationship, intrigue with, or people with whom my relations are affected or distorted by the fact that, to put it bluntly, I fancy them or they fancy me. You can have perfectly ordinary friendships or work relationships where there's a little bit of a flutter or a tension because one or other person has a sexual or romantic interest, and it can change everything and cause all sorts of problems. So I'm looking at any relationship where sex or romance is either involved or implicated, even if there is no actual physical interaction. And it extends to how one looks or does not look at people in public, turning around to look at people in the street. These are all interactions of a sort. They all get to be looked at. Now, there are various ways of doing this. The first way is to write reams and reams about lots and lots of different people. Most people's repertoire is very, very limited. Most people are a 2 or a 3 trick pony. And even if there are sexually transmitted disease clinics in London, maybe they're the same anywhere else. But if you're a gay man, they have a different questionnaire than for everyone else. And they say, between your last appointment here and this appointment, how many people have you had sexual interaction with? 0, 1, 2 to 5, 9 to 10, 11 to 100, 101 to 1,000, more than 1,000. That's one of the boxes. That's one of the boxes because apparently it needs to be one of the boxes. Now, if you fall into that latter category, then you don't need to worry about this inventory. You haven't had 1,000 or 2,000 interactions. You've had one interaction 1,000 times. So there isn't any more to say just because there are more people, because all of the people are entirely interchangeable. So I think one should group these in order not to be sitting there forever repeating, rehashing the same dreary, tired old details again and again and again. So major relationships and categories, one night stands, fumbles in the dark, however you want to label these categories to keep it concise. You don't get points for repetition, and it's rare that a sex inventory will cover more than one page if it's done properly, because no one is that interesting. Now, these individual questions, I've tried the 9-column inventory approach, where you answer these questions separately, and I've not found that productive. I find that tends to elicit the same answer again and again and again, just repeated but with different words. So what's the difference between selfish, dishonest and inconsiderate? Usually not a lot. There's a cigarette paper between selfish and inconsiderate. So I would use these questions as generalized prompts and simply write a list. What did I do I shouldn't have done? What did I not do I shouldn't have done? And it's not just between the sheets activities, it's all of the activities, all of the behaviours in that relationship, even if they have nothing to do with sex, because as soon as there is sex and romance involved, the emotions are heightened and behaviour which would be written off as trivial in other relationships acquires a particular significance. So one's to look at all of these behaviours, to use these questions as prompts, and then you come up with a nice, coherent and concise list of behaviours. One or 2 points on the individual items and some definitions which might help. Selfish is where I put myself first when I should have put the other person first. Dishonest, now, this is unreasonable dishonesty. So if they say, does my arse look big in this? You say, no, you look absolutely lovely, let's go. This is dishonest, but it's not an inappropriate form of dishonesty which needs to make its way to the inventory. And similarly, I think you have the same question. It's very, very common in people's first hack at a step 4 or a step 8 to write with every single relationship, I was dishonest because I shouldn't have been in it in the first place, or I should have left far earlier. And I think rarely these are valid. Typically, there was good enough reason to be in it. And who goes into a relationship with purely charitable motives? Who would want to be in a relationship where you're their charity case? You want them to be selfish. You want them to selfishly want you. That needs to be part of the mix. So we're not interested in those almost monastic heights of ideals. I'm only supposed to be there to be of service to the other person. Maybe you want to progress towards that, but everyone wants to be in a relationship because they want something they can't otherwise have. What matters with these questions is where it's unreasonable. So when people say I was selfish because I didn't want to be on my own, that's like saying I was selfish for eating food because I didn't want to be hungry. Of course you want to be with someone else. There's nothing wrong with that. But unreasonable selfishness, unreasonable dishonesty, inconsiderate, that's really the same as selfishness, except the focus is on the interests of the other people which I neglected. That's asking me more to take into account what in their life was I disregarding. Whom had we hurt? There can be quite a trail of hurt. A friend of mine went to SLA. He had a very difficult relationship with a young lady. They were at the same age, but they were very entangled in an unhealthy way. He went to SLA, and someone suggested, I hope I'm not maligning SLA, this was a single piece of advice, but they said to him, you need to cut off contact with her, just cut the contact dead. Now, he had been threatening suicide, and so he cut off contact from the girlfriend without saying why, without saying, I've joined SLA. I've decided that I need a break and I wish you well and I'm going to look after my mental health and I may be in touch in the future, but this needs to stop for a while. He didn't do that. He just, as they say, ghosted the person. And the family had to pick up the pieces for the nervous breakdown she had in response to this appalling situation, which was perfectly avoidable. So sometimes the people one hurts, there's quite a chain of damage going on beyond the individual person. It's all the people that are supporting that person who might be affected. Next question, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Oh, just one thing on the dishonesty. Of course, one must admit to oneself infidelity, but admitting it to someone else if they don't know about it, that often they'll know in a general way, they'll sense it, but that's covered in step 9. Do we admit those things head on? Not always, it says. So what gets written here might be complete, but not everything that is written here is necessarily going to find its way onto the step 9. But the question, jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness, someone said, why does it say unjustifiably? When is it ever justifiable to arouse jealousy? And I'll tell you where. Um, there are lots of cases. I'm not naturally a jealous person. It's almost the only character defect I don't naturally have. But I've known lots of people who are in these very jealous relationships where people hack into each other's mobile phones and Facebook accounts, and there's setting up false accounts and trailing and catfishing and all sorts of things trying to catch the other person out. And one does come across situations where someone goes to an AA meeting and they come back and they get the 3rd degree from the other person. Who did you talk to? Who was there? And so ordinary behavior can elicit jealousy in someone who's very, very unwell with jealousy. What we're interested in this unjustifiable arousal of jealousy is where we really did either generate the impression we were doing something wrong just to hurt the other person, or were in fact doing something wrong to hurt the other person. Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? So almost all of this is focusing on what was the bad behaviour. And as I say, don't try to answer each question separately. Use the questions as prompts and just write the list of behaviours which hurt the other person. Leave it at that. Now note, this is very, very much a conduct inventory. We're not frightfully interested in internal states, motivations, any of those things. We're interested in the interface with the other person, the things which one did which one shouldn't have done. 1,000 years ago, I was in San Antonio. Feels like a very long time ago, and I was given some time, allowed to have some time with a very old timer from San Antonio. And I was having just a couple of little problems in my relationship. The problem was not in the relationship, the problem was in my silly head. And I said to the chap, should I discuss this with my other half on the basis that, as the common wisdom goes, to have a healthy relationship, I thought you have to have open communication, clear communication. You have to let the other person know how you feel, all the things they do which are affecting you, and that you can achieve intimacy by sharing all of the little things going on inside you. And he said, under absolutely no circumstances should you reveal a damn thing which is going on inside you. That's your darkness. It's not his. Don't make your darkness his problem. You deal with that with your people, and you show up as the best possible husband you can be. And it was the best advice I've received on any topic in my entire life. I learn how to behave properly in that relationship, and I realized that all of that nonsense inside of me, it took a year, all of that nonsense inside of me had nothing to do with the other person. All of my complaints, my plights, my gripes, my disappointments were unreal. They were fictitious. They were made up. I was taking my general dis-ease in life and looking for a way to blame someone else. Who do you look for? The person who's there in the same bedroom. It had nothing to do with him. And so, and this is this dishonesty question. That is stuff that I was not to bring into the relationship. And I know I'm digressing here, so things are just going to come into this talk as they come in, so forgive me for the rather informal and unsystematic and non-linear approach. Rather than this idea that you have to tell the other person everything. My friend Edwina, who is a Chinese pathologist and a public health specialist, she slaughters pigs on her own pathology table on her farm in Warwickshire. She's not to be messed with. She said, if you want to kill a relationship, be honest. Tell them everything that's going on inside you, they'll be gone within 6 months. And what I've learnt is what is real is the good stuff. The dark stuff, none of it, in my case, has been real, which is why it's not dishonest not sharing it, because I'd be sharing illusions and making those illusions real for the other person. It's a lot more like although the Austro-Hungarian Empire ended in, well, a bit of a collapse, in the good years it worked rather well, in that you've got two empires which form an alliance, and there are diplomatic relations between the two sides of this big empire. And that's what it feels like. The intimacy is not, I show everything. My other half has his own private sphere, his own private domain. I have my own private domain. There's nothing in that private domain which is particularly secret or unseemly anymore, but it's still my private domain. And the having of that private domain gives us each a huge degree of safety and security out of which we can generously offer ourselves to the other person in the common domain. There's nothing worse than feeling that there's no way you can sit down, that the other person isn't sitting there already, because you're so entangled and wrapped up in every little twist and turn of their emotions. There is no part of your psyche which you can properly call your own. That's not intimacy, that's entanglement, where you have no idea where you stop and the next person begins. So what the big book talks about is the common ground of love and tolerance. That implies there is ground which is not common, which is private. I don't have a right to know anything that is going on in Jonathan's mind or heart. It is up to him to reveal what he wants to reveal to me. It is up to me to reveal what I want to reveal to him. He's got stuff going on with his family. I don't know a damn thing about what's going on and he doesn't care to share it. That's fine with me. If he wants to, I'm there. If he doesn't, that's fine. I don't have rights, which is a very unmodern view. I don't have rights. If I have rights, the fulfillment of those rights, the exercise of those rights, the other person doing their contractual part, turns the whole thing into a transaction. For this to be love, it has to be giving of yourself for fun and for free, expecting nothing in return. So if I give to him, I'm not due anything back. There was a couple of years where he was really under a cloud with some work stuff. I never found out what that was, and he didn't bring that into the home. And I thought he was shutting me out. He wasn't. He was preserving a common space of peace and love where that shit from work wasn't allowed in. And I didn't understand that till years later. I thought he was cutting me out. He wasn't. He was creating a space where we could be together and enjoy all of the things that were light and lovely and beautiful. It's the opposite of what you're told. Part of what makes the marriage work is that for him there is still a degree of mystery about me, and for me there is still a degree of mystery about him. And I narrate all of my stuff of the day with friends, natter, 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 and he's got his people he talks to. We don't natter with each other, we just be with each other. Anyway, big digression. If it's useful, it's useful. If it's not, it's not. Next paragraph. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relationship to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mould our ideals and help us live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. So what this is asking me to do, using as the springboard the inventory of everything that went wrong. What is the sane and sound ideal? Now, I know people get this wrong, but there's no need to, because the book is clear. The sane and sound ideal for one's sex life, relationships, dating, whatever phase one is in, is an ideal for what my attitude should be and what my behavior should be. Now, in a sense, there's always a selfish motive in the ordinary sense. If one didn't want anything, if one didn't want a relationship, then one wouldn't have one at all. But I think it's using selfish in this sentence to say, am I in it just for myself or chiefly for myself? Or by contrast, am I in the relationship in order to build something durable with another person? Now, the model, and I have various Course in Miracles teachers to thank for this image. The model of the sick relationship, and Don Pritz rather brilliantly says, I don't know how to have a healthy sick relationship. If the relationship is based on the wrong premises, then I don't think there's a way of fixing it. I've never fixed a sick relationship in my life. I've never seen one fixed. There may be exceptions. But anyway, this is how the sick relationship for me worked. I'm a pile of crap, but I'm going to conceal that. I'm going to wrap the pile of crap in beautiful wrapping paper, and I'm going to give you the present, which is a pile of crap wrapped in beautiful wrapping paper, and you're going to give me a present back, which is your wonderful self. And then you open up the wrapping paper and you realise they've given you the same pile of crap that you've just given them, except neither of you can admit that's what you've done, and you spend the rest of the relationship blaming the other person for the pile of crap that you gave them. But the sex is good, and that's the wrapping paper. And the purpose of those relationships, I know only 2 of you identify with that on any level at all, but one feels so guilty because one has sold them a bill of goods. That's the dishonesty. This idea that you take 2 broken people and you put them together and you have one whole person. Now you have the original brokenness on your part, the original brokenness on their part, and then the interaction between 2 brokennesses. You've got an extra problem which wasn't there to start with, which becomes the relationship. Then you go and see a relationship counsellor, and there are 4 people in the room. There is the relationship counsellor, there is you, there is the other person, and then there's this small dwarf or goblin monster called the relationship, and then the relationship was apparently the problem, so you shoot the goblin, leave the relationship, and find someone else to repeat the whole thing again. There's a story in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, one of the episodes, where these characters get taken over by a couple where there was an argument where he shot her, and they reenact, taken over by these spirits, they reenact the same murder scene, and ever more couples reenact the same murder scene. And that was my relationships. I would repeat exactly the same relationship, hoping this time the ending was going to change. But it never did, because the basis was there was something wrong with me, and if I'm with a shiny person, then the shiny person will shine my problems away, and then we'll be all right. Someone said to me, the only problem that being in a relationship will solve is the problem of not being in a relationship. It will literally solve nothing else, and only be in a relationship if you want to forgive and serve, because those are the 2 chief activities of the relationship. Learning to be with someone with all of their faults and never saying a damn thing about any of them, and then yielding and yielding and yielding and yielding and yielding. So my sane and sound ideal in my relationship is forgive everything by withdrawing any sense that he should be different in any way at all. And Rabbi Manis Friedman is absolutely brilliant on this, on relationships. Again, very unmodern in a sense, very unfashionable, but maybe ahead of his time. One of the things he says about your other half's character defects is in the same way that if they were undressing, you would turn your eyes to allow them the modesty of being naked in strong light without having someone stare at them. If they have character defects, you turn your head away so they have the dignity of having the character defects without you staring at the character defects and commenting on them. Modesty. And I can't change the other person. I can't change me. So I sure as hell can't change the other person. So my job is to look at every single thing that I might think is a character defect and say, that's not a character defect. That's a feature. So Jonathan's quite catastrophic disorganization is actually a great virtue, because it means he doesn't give a shit about most things, and he's really, really relaxed about a lot of things that other people would be uptight about. If he was as tidy as me, we'd both be in prison by now. So all of these things which I think are character defects are perfectly well-tuned features which are answers to my problems. They're not defects at all. Having said that, of course, there are, and the big book is brilliant on this. I haven't got the quotation, but it says something about there are some people who are thoroughly ill-intentioned and don't let them use the book as a way of subjugating you effectively. So if you're with someone who is fundamentally malicious, unreasonable, then there's nothing you can do. But most people I've found are reasonable. Most people are not psychopaths. In, I think it's Mary Pearl, could be someone else, these various reworkings of the traditions. One of the workings of, or reworkings of tradition 3 is this: the only requirement for membership of the relationship is a desire to be in it and to make it work. And what the relationship is, it's much more like the Austro-Hungarian Empire than it is like a Barbara Taylor Bradford novel. It's a business venture. It's the creation of a household which is so strong it can see both of you through all of the problems you have in your life. Someone sent us an anniversary card many years ago, which was a picture of a small rowing boat or similar, a skiff, floating down a river with 2 dogs sitting in the prow, just sitting there looking ahead. And that's a perfect image. The relationship is not the interaction between the 2 of you. The relationship is the vessel which is carrying the 2 of you down the river. So the ideal: total forgiveness, which means total acceptance, which means total withdrawal of any criticism, judgment, attempt to fix, change or control or regulate or alter the other person at all. And then total yielding. We both yield a lot and we somehow meet in the middle. If I yielded less than I did, and he yielded less than he did, we wouldn't meet in the middle. Dr. Paul O talks about when you give 50%, that looks like 20% to the other person. So to give what looks like 50% to the other person, you have to give about 80 or 90%. And I've discussed this openly with Jonathan, and we've decided when I think I'm making some grand, extravagant concession to his eccentricities and foibles, and I'm exhibiting the grand gesture, he thinks I'm finally seeing sense. And the same works the other way round. So to meet in the middle, you've got to go all the way as if you're giving everything away, as if you've got nothing left, and then you'll meet in the middle. And if you're both trying to make it work, it works. Jonathan and I, this is part of the ideal as well. We were discussing why people we know have arguments in their relationships. We don't argue. I said to him, why don't we argue? He says it's because we don't like it, so we don't do it. And it's perfect, that answer, because it means there is a purpose in the argument and the conflict. And the purpose is this, the game of pass the parcel. If you're not every culture has pass the parcel, but there's a parcel and inside it there's a present, except it's wrapped and then wrapped and wrapped, and the parcel goes around the room, and whenever the music stops, you have to unwrap one of the layers and then the parcel goes on. Except this pass the parcel in a damaged relationship has a bomb inside it, and whoever unwraps the final layer, that is the person who explodes. So you're passing the explosive parcel back and forth, waiting for who it's going to explode in. This is why you have to have the last word, to put the parcel back in their lap, so the parcel explodes in their lap, not your lap. Now, the reason why I've never solved a conflict relationship, the conflict wasn't the problem in the healthy relationship. The purpose of the relationship was to provide me with a forum for conflict. That's why it can't be solved. The relationship was there entirely to have the conflict. That's why it can't be solved. If one person gets well, the whole thing is over. So we don't argue. How do we do this? We yield. And we have our own lives. So once I have no opinion on anything he does in his life, there is remarkably less to argue about. It's only the joint things. One could talk for a week about the application of the concepts to relationships. Maybe that would be another session at some point. Anyway, my ideal is basically this. Forgive by withdrawing any sense that there is anything to forgive, and serve. And that's the end of it. If you've seen Downton Abbey, the way the staff from below stairs, when they're upstairs, they serve, they behave impeccably, they never say anything out of turn, and they conceal any negative emotions they have when they're behaving themselves. And that's, in my book, How to Have a Good Relationship. Is that faking it? No, it's denying the unreal illusions of the ego. It's the proper form of denial. What is light is real. What is dark is unreal. So, whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. Now, this means in any step 8 and 9, I'm not to reveal internal states. I'm not to reveal motivations. None of that crap. No one wants to know what you are feeling or thinking at the time. They just want an apology for you being a douchebag. There we go. That's what they want. They don't want a front row seat to your pop psychology as to why you did the things that you did. They're just not interested. So very straightforward amends there. Now, the book is brilliant. It does this at a few points. It gives an example and then says, as it does here, in other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. This means it's just told us how to handle any problem you ever encounter, forever, which is this. We ask God to mold our ideals, right belief, right action, right behaviour, and help us to live up to them. This is why I don't have problems anymore. I haven't had problems for a while. I have something that looks like a problem. I go to God immediately within 4 nanoseconds and say, right attitude, right thinking, right behaviour, go. And then I'm shown. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but I'm shown. So I don't hold with having a problem, I hold with giving the situation to God in order that it not become a problem. The only 3 things I can change are belief, thinking and behaviour, which is why that is the focus of the prayer, belief, thinking and behaviour. So we have a solution to all problems, and it's amazing. The program starts on page 63. Everything else is preparation. By the end of page 69, which is, if my maths is correct, 6 pages, we have a complete and permanent solution to resentment, fear, and problems. I need never have another resentment. I need never have another fear. I need never have another problem if I will only do what it says. And if something comes up that if I'm tempted to resent, if I'm tempted to be fearful, if I'm tempted to consider something a problem, I've got to remember I must still be enjoying it because there is a solution there ready for me as soon as I want it. I've never met a fish taco I didn't like, but a couple of days ago I met a fish taco that didn't like me, and I've had quite the 48 hours, let me tell you. And there was some magnesium salts on the table for whenever I wanted to have them. But I didn't. Of course, I had to do it my own way. There is a solution to these things if only we want it. Next passage. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. We realise that some people are fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Well, that cuts out most people you talk to in AA. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. God alone can judge our sex situation. Now, the way most people read that is I can do whatever I want. No one can tell me what to do. No, 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 no. Of course, no one else can judge my sex situation, but God can. You think God is going to be easier than other people. You think you can get away with anything because it's God. No, it's actually much tougher. And I think in the modern world, I live in London, which is, shall we say, one of the more permissive places to live. I'm sure there are places which are far less permissive. You can get away with almost anything, and you can find people to get away with the almost anything with in large numbers. And of course, there's the danger of moral co-signing. If you can find enough other people to do the thing with that you want to do, it becomes normal and it becomes fine. It ceases to be a moral question. Now, what this says is I have to ask God. What that means is there may be lots of things which 19 out of 20 people in modern society will say absolutely fine. We're no longer subject to Victorian strictures about sex and romance. We're progressive. We're modern. As though somehow progress and modernity have abolished God, have abolished morality, that the new morality is you do whatever you want. Now, there surely are lots of different people in the world, but I found God to be far sterner about what my conduct should be than people are. So don't think it's Liberty Hall just because it's now God judging the sex situation, you get away with whatever you want. Now, it doesn't mean, what I don't want to say by that, what I don't want to be understood by that is that for the rest of your life, you know, it's necessarily monogamy in marriage and no sex before marriage. I don't mean that at all. I know people that have a wild old time and are fine, and other people who, if they did that, would not be fine, would be very much not fine very quickly. Unfortunately, the only way to find out, if you'll pardon the expression, is to suck it and see. It's almost impossible to talk. I've suppressed so many double entendres throughout this. I try to avoid big book meetings where they're talking about the about the sex inventory, because someone invariably says that I used sex to fill that gaping hole inside of me, and everyone can see the irony except the person who's saying this dreadful line. So one must be terribly careful, or seeing rather unprepossessing people talking about the wielding of their sex powers, or when people in a meeting about the sex inventory, when you say please share your experience, strength and hope on what we have just read, what they think you've said is please do your step 5 with a particular focus on your sex life. So you get all sorts of things. You get more than you bargained for in a meeting on this. Anyway, the point is, God alone can judge, which means I've had to find out for myself what works and doesn't work. I got things very wrong for a long time. When I realised they were wrong, I did something about it. So one can't simply, it's not a matter of rules that other people imposes, but one must, I believe, sincerely go to God. And even if what comes down the tubes from God is very different than what one might expect, one has to go with it. One can't second guess God's will. Suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but it is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will have been forgiven and we will have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we're quite sure to drink. We're not theorising, these are facts of our experience. I think there has to be a degree of self-honesty and sincerity in this area. It's possible, and I'm certainly someone that has been impulsive and compulsive in the area of sex and romance. With compulsive behaviour, it's very like alcohol. So when one uncorks the bottle and starts to drink, one is brought out of that drinking episode by an act of providence. Now, I've known people, I've seen this a lot, and I've suffered it myself, but I've seen it a lot, when I've gone into a period of compulsion and I've desperately wanted it to stop. But unfortunately, it's just like alcohol, it stops when it stops. Now, here's the trick. It talks about being some in the literature, he wants to stop. I think it's in the chapter to wives about the husband's alcoholism. He wants to stop. I don't think that's quite right. That position where I'm 2 stages removed from stopping the behaviour, whatever it is. I would say if the behaviour is harming someone else, that's a different thing. What I'm talking about is compulsive behaviour, the sort of victimless crime of the compulsive behaviour. What I've found myself to be in is 2 stages removed. I don't yet want to stop, but I technically recognise I ought to. Now, when I go to God and say, I know technically this has to go, and this can be with sex, it can be with romance, but basically, as it says, you treat sex as you would any other problem. So I think it's true with food stuff. I think it's true with all sorts of things. I'm in the middle of an episode. I don't want to stop, and I technically recognise that I ought to. What I can do is go to God and say, I don't even want to stop. Can you please do something to me that my wanting comes in line with my technical recognition that this behaviour has to stop? And I'll tell you the bad news, within 24 hours, you discover yourself wanting to stop, and then it's pretty quick after that. But there'll be a moment of reprieve, and that's when I have to put in place bottom lines and tighten up my behaviour, basically. But these things seem to have to work themselves through the system. It's not a matter of just stop. It's not been like that for me, and with people I've sponsored, it's rarely been like that. The danger is if you consult someone for whom it is like that, they can just stop. They're not helpful to people that can't just stop. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. That's fairly straightforward. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. One thing that I found, if I'm if I've got impulsive or compulsive behavior in any area of my life, the quickest way out of it is not by trying to do something about the behavior, but by filling my life with step 12 work. And eventually I discover that's far more interesting than whatever the impulsive or compulsive behavior is. I simply don't have time anymore. I simply don't have the energy. So the principle of substitution. One more thing which I want to share from the 12 on 12 is relationships in AA. It is only where boy meets girl on AA campus and love follows at first sight that difficulties may develop. The prospective partners need to be solid AAs and long enough acquainted to know that their compatibility at spiritual, mental, and emotional levels is a fact and not wishful thinking. They need to be as sure as possible that no deep-lying emotional handicap in either will be likely to rise up under later pressures to cripple them. When I was a year and a half, I got into a relationship with someone else in AA who was fairly new in AA. We, as it were, courted for a few months before anything physical happened. We both had sponsors. We had both worked the steps. We both had, frankly, emotional handicaps, which were really problematic, but both of us were blessed with a particular virtue, is neither of us blamed the other person for our own difficulties. So we didn't take it out on each other. That is the one prerequisite. One's got to have gotten over that by that point for it to work. There's the vexed question of newcomers and relationships. A friend of mine from Northern California says that in meetings at the end, where in other parts of the country they chant after the Serenity Prayer, keep coming back, it works if you work it. At his meetings, they have to say, I'm not going to die if I don't get laid. I'm not going to die if I don't get laid. Just to remind people they can make it to the next meeting without having sex and their organs will not fail. The advice that was given to me when I was new, I'm going to say something a little bit crude, so if you've got delicate constitutions, then put some cheese in your ears. But Doug, my first proper sponsor, I had a couple of improper sponsors before that. I won't go into details. One of them, his clothes fell off. I think he suffered from that situation far more than I did. He was the one that got into psychological trouble. I was so effed, I didn't know what was going on. I was fine, he wasn't. Anyway, Doug, my first proper sponsor, said, this is more candid than I'd hoped, but there we go. Doug said about sex in your first year, don't shit where you eat, princess. In other words, if you must go and do something, for heaven's sake, don't do it in AA. There was a chap whose poor old chap, his nickname was Mike the Bike because everyone had had a ride. You don't want that reputation in AA, and you don't want to be entangled with people who are then going to relapse and die and think, I'm part of the story that led them to relapse and death. You don't want anything to do with that. So when I go to a meeting, if there's someone I find attractive, boy, will I not talk to them, or even not a facial glance, not let anything slip. I keep AA, I keep any of those feelings completely out of, I've learnt the hard way, completely out of AA. Diplomatic mission, the same professionalism I would show in a business meeting, that absolutely has no place. The common sense of this is that, and yes, do start asking questions because I'm about to wind up. The thing is, until one's completed step 9 and really acquired a new life through the carrying of the message, the practicing of these principles in all one's affairs, and maybe developed a hobby or two which has nothing to do with sex and romance, that one has something to bring to the table. The danger, if one enters into a relationship, and I know this from experience, without having done that work, is that one will bundle up all of the past mistakes into a single relationship, and one will just do a historical reenactment. And these things are so awful inside one's home group. So yeah, my sponsor's advice was very good advice. It's not a matter of first year, it's a matter of having completed the steps and then give it a bit, give it a minute. Sometimes people are like raring to go, they're desperate to get to a year sober so they can start sleeping around or whatever they're doing. And it's not about that. So that's a real hodgepodge. First question, do get the questions coming into the chat either directly or to Keith or in the everyone box. So first question, when it says we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life, is this an instruction to write this ideal down and discuss it with your sponsor? Well, unless your memory is particularly good, you probably have to write it down. I'm not a big writer of things except as an aid memoir, in other words, to help me remember things that I would otherwise forget. But yes, maybe discuss it with a sponsor. But keep it simple. You'll give him a good old laugh as well. And, the old man likes a laugh. He doesn't have much to laugh about. So give him a laugh. Read your sane and sound ideal. So here's a question. Pornography, good, bad, thoughts. Ask God what God's will is for you. That's the only thing I'll say on that matter. Someone said, can you share the reworked Tradition 3 around the relationship? Yes. The only requirement for membership of the relationship is a desire to be in it and to make it work. I'm going to expand very slightly on that. What does work mean? Well, when one enters into a relationship, once it becomes domestic, one is really setting up a household, and a household is a business. It is a business from a financial point of view. It is a business from an operational point of view. If there are children, if there are pets, sometimes one cat can be more work than 3 children. There are things to take care of. There are important things to decide. There's delegation of responsibilities. Who is going to be responsible for what? What needs to be decided individually? What needs to be decided jointly? You've really got to have a cool head. This is not about mending your wounded self-esteem. It's about establishing a structure which is functional and which will withstand the storms and the vicissitudes of life. This is not a venue to sort out your psychology. That needs to be dealt with already. And so the 2 parameters of something working, according to Bill W.'s essays on the concepts, are effectiveness and efficiency. You achieve the goals and you do so with minimum expenditure of resources. I would add a third one, which is harmony. You want to rub along as well as possible. Is my partner in AA too? God, no. I can't imagine. I was with someone in AA for many years and it was very good. We grew apart. We had different ultimate objectives in life. We wanted to live in different places, have very different lifestyles. But as a relationship, it worked very well. There's nothing wrong with AA relationships, of course. My other half, what I've learnt is that a good 20 or 30 years of really working the program as hard as you can will bring you up to the baseline of regular people and how they're just kitted out with how to live. So I've learned a lot about relationships from how he naturally is. How does one decide to make amends to an ex that is owed an amend? Well, the answer lies in step 8. If I have harmed the person, it says I'm willing to make amends to them all. That includes the person. In step 9, we made amends to such persons except when to do so would injure them or others. Now, the fact of having done something wrong in the past and bringing that up in order to make amends cannot itself cause fresh injury. The notion the caveat, the get out clause in step 9, is not the eliciting of negative emotion. When you apologize to someone, often in the moment they will be furious because they're recalling the situation. But that doesn't mean you're not supposed to make amends, because then you would say you make amends to everyone except anyone who was upset when you harmed them. It becomes ridiculous. That would become a reason for not making amends to anyone. In the book, it talks about the situation where you might be thrown out of the office of someone because they're angry. It doesn't then go on to say that, oh, well, you shouldn't have made amends just because your making of amends made them angry. It didn't make them angry, really. It elicited anger which had been there the whole time. Ask yourself this. Have you ever gone to a friend and said, someone apologise to me? The bloody nerve of it. I can't. What a terrible thing to do. And have the other person said, they apologised? How dare they? What an immoral act. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Now, the problem with going to X's for amends, there is a risk of saying things of revealing new information. There's a risk of so grossly misunderstanding the nature of the wrong that the amend is an insult, not because you're apologising, but you have no idea of the magnitude of what you did wrong, therefore it becomes insulting. You think that you're going to be let off the hook with your little apology when you haven't even touched the sides of what you did wrong. So they can go wrong, but if they're done with the right degree of humility and consideration and forethought, and they give the other person enough space to really have a go at you. Several people in amends really had a go at me. Not the exes, actually, but some of the other people, home group members. One person shouted, I was holding the phone like this. One person shouted for 15 minutes. He was hoarse by the end of it. But he got it out of his system. When I saw him at a meeting 3 weeks later, he was fine. So just because you might elicit emotion doesn't mean you're doing something wrong by apologising or making amends. One has to be careful, very tactful if they're in a relationship with someone else, considerate, formal, do it in writing usually, and to make it clear that this is not you getting your foot in the door again in some way or attempting to generate some sort of new interaction. There's a way of doing it with sufficient gravitas and formality that it forfends any risk of them thinking you're after something. So it's not a matter of whether. I think one does do it. I made amends to all of my exes from before recovery. It's a matter of the how, it's a matter of the preparation. If you get that right, I think there's very little that can go wrong. The ideal relationship described seems robotic. Don't relationships need intimacy to thrive? Does intimacy not involve tears, being vulnerable, discussing deep personal emotions, experiences? Where's the intimacy? You do what you want. If you enjoy that, good for you. As I said, what is light is real. That personal darkness, that's all about my twisted psychology. I don't connect through your ego identifying with my darkness. I mentioned it before, the first line of Anna Karenina, I'll spare you the Russian, where he says, all happy families are happy in the same way, resemble each other, he says. All happy families resemble each other. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. I think that's completely backwards. If you've heard step 5s, you'll know that, especially when people talk about relationships, what do you have? Jealousy, recriminations. He doesn't respect me. He doesn't listen. He won't give me emotional space. He's not emotionally available. He's shut down. He's cold. There are about 7 or 8 complaints, and they cover the whole thing. He's untidy. The thing about this is, if you think about an orchestra, and then you think about a snare drum, What do you want to listen to? Do you want to listen to Mahler's Fifth, or do you want to just listen to someone hitting a snare drum for an hour and a half? The all the positive stuff, the love, the togetherness, the enjoying things together, that's like listening to a snare drum, listening to an orchestra. Listening to a snare drum is listening to all of that other crap. I had so many relationships, friendships before AA, which were precisely about tears, vulnerability, deep personal emotions and experiences. I can't remember a damn thing I said in one of those conversations. And I don't think I knew what I meant at the time. But one's got to work that through. I needed to get to a place where I realised that that veil of tears was a world of illusions, and I was sick of it, and I wanted to join the real world. And I tell you, having dinner with my other half every day, each day is like a trip to Disneyland. I don't know why it's different every day. I don't know. The range of emotions, the range of positive emotions is like those color spectra on Microsoft Word or something, where these thousands of colors, and then there are websites you can go up, and each of these colors has got these remarkable names, or paint shops, all these remarkable names. Those negative emotions that I had friendships which were based solely on tears and vulnerability and all of that sort of stuff. Two colors, red and black. Boring. There's nothing more boring than that. This is the ego's big defense against getting well. It tells you that the pain of the prison is more real than the beautiful universe outside there, which can be accessed only when I cease to exist, when I forget I'm even there. Then there is this amazing universe to live in, the books to read, the music to enjoy, the nature to enjoy, the silly jokes. My other half invents all of these characters, this play acting. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Thank God I've got that and not weeping. There's been enough time of weeping in my life. I'm done with it. Sorry if that was a bit of a rant, but there we go. I lived in that for years, and I was trapped in it because I believed those ideas. I believe you hear it in meetings. Someone speaks, and it's trauma and awfulness and da 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 da, and someone says, "Thank you for your raw honesty." You'll never hear someone share happily and someone say thank you for your honesty. That's because people believe unhappiness is an illusion and unhappiness is the only thing that is real. So when unhappiness elicits the gratitude for honesty, what they're telling you is hell is real and nothing else is real. And it's the typical upside down thinking of the ego. Don't buy it. You're worth more than that. God wants more for you than to go round in circles rehashing childhood trauma, reenacting it like historical reenactments in current relationships, and just be done with it. There is more to life than that. Another question. What are your thoughts on unsent letters to an ex who is now in a new relationship, or is it better to accept that amends will never be made due to causing more harm? Discuss this with your sponsor and trust your sponsor, although make sure your sponsor has completed their amends and not scooted out of them, especially all the amends to exes on the grounds that it might cause more harm. If my other half received an apology letter for someone's behaviour from his ex from 25 years ago, which said, dear Jonathan, I want to sincerely apologise for my behaviour in the 1990s. And these are the things that I did wrong, and I recognise how harmful all of that stuff was. I wish you well in your in your present relationship. May it last forever. I do not wish to interfere. I do not even need a response. I wish you well, and I'm sorry for the hurt that I caused. I would be thrilled for my other half that he would receive a letter like that. I would not be threatened by that. If someone's marriage is threatened by receiving an apology like that, you see, it's a red herring. The ego will find any way to avoid amends in this area. Let me have a look. What else do we have? What if both parties in the relationship have a desire to make it work, but one is unwilling or unable to compromise at an ongoing impasse that continues to create conflict until resolution is found? How should one proceed applying program principles? The subtext of this is it's the other person that's being unreasonable. How do I live with someone who is obviously unreasonable? One of the things, and this is a difficult thing to convey, I hope I'll do it successfully. And anything I say this evening, if it helps, great. If it doesn't help, really don't worry about it, because a lot of this stuff is really contentious. Whenever I make a concession to my other half, whenever I compromise, it feels as though I'm being walked all over and the other person is being utterly unreasonable. Now, the problem here is any concession by its nature will feel like the concession of a point which should not be conceded. If it was obvious that one should concede the point, you wouldn't be in that position in the first place. So what I've learnt to do, Jonathan, just concede anyway. And I haven't found anything I've conceded on which I wasn't relieved afterwards that I finally conceded, because concession is always better than warfare. There are some bottom lines. So, for instance, I don't merge my finances with Jonathan. I'm a Virgo, and if you're in a relationship with the Virgo does the finances. There we go. That's just the end of it. You bill the Aquarius twice a year. So I bill Jonathan, I send him a bill, and he pays me. And then that's the end of it. If we merged finances, we'd both be in prison. So we don't do that. There was a way out of that situation. But here's the thing, having a desire to make it work is having a desire to concede the unconcedable, to accept the unacceptable. If you want to have boundaries, don't have a relationship. I don't think you can have both. I've dropped any notion of boundaries. He is as he is, and that's the end of it. And if he won't give in, I guess I'll have to. And I've never regretted it. That's me. If it doesn't work for other people, I would understand that. How did you make amends to one-night stands or anonymous encounters? Oh, sir, you're making quite the presumption that I harmed such people. I don't know what you think I did to them, but I can assure you they're very satisfied customers. I'm going to say something. When I was in my very early 20s, Soho is not what it was. When I was in my very early 20s, drinking in Soho, I used to drink at a pub which was frequented largely by rent boys and their punters, and I was barred from that place because I would pick up the punters, I would give away what other people were charging for. So I've got quite a colourful past. So this is steps 8 and 9. If you've harmed someone, you make amends. You don't automatically harm someone by virtue of having sex with them. Now, we're not generally, most of us don't live in a sort of Jane Austen-like social environment. Most such encounters, unless they involve manifest deceit or cruelty, they're, as it were, a victimless crime. Even if there's a breach of a moral principle, one might assert that, and I'm not going to express a view on this, one might assert that casual sex is morally wrong. That is a view that many people hold. Not everyone, but it's a view that many people hold. One might hold, therefore, that by engaging in that, you've harmed the other person by enabling them to commit a sin themselves. There was, if you're familiar with tort law, there was a case around 1912, I don't remember the case title, where a gentleman sued a landowner. He'd been riding on a bicycle through someone's land. There'd been a branch in the middle of the road, and his bicycle hit the branch. He went flying, he broke his arm, and he sued the landowner for not maintaining the road properly, because if he had, the branch wouldn't have been there, he wouldn't have had the accident, he wouldn't have broken his arm. And the judge found in favour of the plaintiff, the chap whose arm was broken, but his damages were reduced to nil because the judge said you should have had a light on your bicycle. If you'd had a light on your bicycle, you wouldn't have hit the branch, you wouldn't have broken your arm. So there's something called contributory negligence. His negligence contributed to the accident. So let's say even if a one-night stand is immoral, and it's immoral on both fronts, and there are no third parties involved, their contributory negligence in that cancels anything out. You can't go to people and say, I did something terribly morally wrong, and by the way, so did you. I know you wouldn't admit it, but I know you did, as though you're making amends on their behalf. One, I think, should only really make amends to people who consider themselves to have been harmed. There were brief flings I had where I behaved very badly, not in a sexual sense, it was a sexual relationship, but the bad behaviour was social, personal, where I did make amends to them. But there I just had to find my way, find them on Facebook or through other people. And on that rather unsavoury note, and with the great relief that we're leaving this topic to cover step 5 next week, I think, Keith, that's all I've got.